The silverware still clinked softly when she spat the words "rot" and "die" across a Mother's Day table I once paid for. Still, I smiled, folded my napkin, and stood like I had somewhere better to be. As her laughter chased me out the restaurant, the jazz overhead blurred into noise, distant, irrelevant. While she posed for photos in my name, I revised the will with hands steadier than hers ever deserved. The same voice that screamed at brunch was silent when the attorney read her name last, and then read nothing else. That's when I realized revenge doesn't shout. It signs and seals in silence. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor. Subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. The morning air in Charleston carried that soft salt stillness Lena always loved, magnolia blossoms bowing heavy with scent, the sea breeze threading through the old live oaks outside her porch. She'd chosen her dress carefully. Pale blue linen, pearl earrings, silver hair swept into a French twist. Mother's Day brunch, Graham had said. Just family. Simple. She wanted to believe him. The restaurant, Mariner's Table, was the kind of place Brielle liked to be seen. Glass walls, floral cocktails, and too loud laughter echoing off marble. Lena spotted them at a corner table already. Graham, anxious hands clasped, and Brielle, radiant in her curated perfection, phone angled for a story post before even greeting her. "Mother," Brielle sang, stretching the word like silk. "We thought we'd treat you to something modern this year." Lena smiled. Polite as porcelain. "That's thoughtful." The waiter poured mimosas. The first few minutes passed with brittle niceties. Weather, travel, the garden Lena had planted on the east lot. Graham kept glancing between the two women, trying to keep his voice even, like a man balancing a tray on uneven ground. Then Brielle began. "So," she said, stabbing a raspberry with her fork. "I saw the community board announcing another Whitmore Garden dedication. You're still doing those?" Lena's eyes lifted. "Still, yes." Brielle gave a sweet, hollow laugh. "It's quaint. You really do love living in the past, don't you?" Graham's jaw tightened. "Brie," she waved him off. "No, I mean it. I admire it, really. The way you cling to tradition, like you're, what's the phrase? Overstaying your era." The table's hum faltered. The clink of silverware from other diners carried louder than before. Lena placed her napkin neatly beside her plate. "Every era ends when it should," she said calmly. Brielle's smile thinned. "Oh, does it?" Lena didn't answer. She reached for her glass, the faint tremor of sunlight cutting across the stem. Her silence, as always, was its own verdict. Something flickered across Brielle's face. Frustration, insecurity, something deeper and raw. She leaned forward, her voice tightening. "You think you're so graceful, don't you? Floating above everyone, but you're just taking up space, waiting for people to keep pretending you still matter." Graham shifted. "Brielle, stop." But the dam had cracked. Brielle's cheeks flushed, her tone rising. "You can't even let go. You've turned your house into a shrine, your money into strings for everyone to dance on. You want gratitude? Here it is. Thank you for everything. Now rot and die already." Every head in the restaurant turned. Even the jazz from the speakers seemed to choke mid-note. Graham froze, eyes fixed on his untouched eggs. The sunlight caught on the rim of Lena's glass as she set it down. Slowly, she dabbed her mouth with the napkin, folded it once, then again, her fingers steady. No one spoke. She stood, pushing her chair in without a sound. The pearl buttons on her sleeve caught the light like small moons. When she finally looked at Brielle, her gaze wasn't angry, just heartbreakingly clear. "I see," she said softly. Then she turned and walked away. Her heels clicked once, twice across the tile before the door closed behind her. The wind from the open patio brushed against her hair as she stepped out into the sunlit street. Inside, Brielle sat stiff, jaw tight, realizing the silence she'd demanded had fallen, not just in the restaurant, but between her and every person watching. Outside, Lena paused at the curb. The scent of magnolia returned, sweet and strong, the same as when she'd left her house that morning. She took one long breath, steadying the small tremor beneath her ribs. A car passed, sunlight glinting off its window like a signal flare. Lena's reflection stared back, calm, composed, alive with a quiet decision forming behind her eyes. She didn't know yet what her next move would be, only that it would not be loud, nor hurried. It would be precise. By the time Graham stumbled out onto the sidewalk calling, "Mom, wait," she was already halfway down the street. She didn't turn around, and as she crossed under the blooming oaks, the sound of her heels faded into something sharper. The first quiet notes of a reckoning that had already begun. The next morning, Charleston felt different. The same oaks hung low over Meeting Street, but the air carried a new weight. Not grief exactly, but resolve. Lena parked outside Vance and Hart Estate Law, her old sedan humming to a quiet stop. The office's red brick facade reflected clean order, the kind of place where emotion went to die on paperwork. Claire Hart's receptionist ushered her in without question. Inside, the air was cool and clinical. Lemon polish, no perfume. Claire herself stood by the window, a trim woman in charcoal gray, posture straight enough to cut glass. "Mrs. Whitmore," she said, offering a measured smile. "I wasn't expecting you until next month." "I moved some things up," Lena replied. Her voice was level, not cold, but carrying that undercurrent of something sharpened overnight. She placed a thin folder on Claire's desk. "There are changes to the beneficiary list." Claire opened it, scanning the neat script. Her pen hovered for a moment over the second page. "You're sure you want to remove her entirely?" Lena sat back. "I am." The pen clicked softly. Claire adjusted her glasses. "Once you sign this revision, Mrs. Whitmore, Brielle Whitmore is legally and irrevocably excluded from the estate. All trusts, residual clauses, property shares, she's out." "That's the first signature I've enjoyed writing in years," Lena said. Her hand didn't tremble as she signed. Each loop of her name felt like closing a door. Slow and deliberate, Claire sealed the file, her expression unreadable. "Thomas Ray will need to update the financial authorizations to match. Would you like me to arrange that now?" "Yes," Lena said. "Today." When Thomas arrived 20 minutes later, the atmosphere didn't shift. It simply deepened. He carried a leather folder and that quiet, unshakable competence Lena had relied on for 2 decades. "Morning, Mrs. Whitmore." "Morning, Thomas. Let's finish this." He nodded and began laying out documents: account transfers, trust reassignments, account lockouts. Each page bore the same gravity, protections disguised as numbers. Claire watched as Lena initialed and signed. "Once these are processed, Brielle won't have access to joint holdings. Graham's accounts will stand independent. You'll have full control of the estate until execution." Lena set her pen down, her tone still even. "Good. No one who wishes me dead should profit from my life." Thomas gave a faint smile. "I'll see to it personally." They worked in silence after that, the rhythmic scratch of pen against paper filling the room like rain on glass. When it was done, Claire slid the completed file toward Lena. "Is there anything else?" "Yes," Lena said, leaning forward. "I want a final clause added. In any future trusts, in every reference, there will be no mention of Brielle Whitmore. Not as spouse, not as in-law. It's as if she never existed in this family's record." Claire hesitated just long enough to measure the seriousness of her tone. "You understand what that means. You're erasing her presence from all future documents. I'm erasing her shadow, Lena replied. Presence was never really there. Thomas closed his folder and stood. I'll have everything finalized within 48 hours. Thank you, Lena said. She rose, collecting her gloves. You've both been invaluable. As she reached the door, Claire's voice followed softly. Mrs. Whitmore, people sometimes reconsider decisions made in anger. Lena turned back, eyes calm but impenetrable. Anger is loud, Ms. Hart. This is quiet. She stepped into the hallway, her heels clicking against the tile. The same rhythm as yesterday's, but steadier now, like a metronome guiding something inevitable. Outside, the late afternoon light gilded the sidewalks. She paused beneath the iron balcony, watching the sun glint through the courthouse windows across the street. The city carried on, unaware that one woman's legacy had just redrawn itself. From her purse, Lena pulled out her phone and typed a message to Eloise. Lunch tomorrow? There's something I want to tell you. And something I've already done. She sent it, slipped the phone away and walked toward her car, her reflection trailing beside her in the glass storefronts. Poised, unflinching, and untouchably certain. Behind her, inside that red brick office, Claire Hart placed the revised documents in the fireproof cabinet, labeling the file in her careful print. Whitmore Estate. Final revision signed. She paused before closing the drawer, murmuring to herself, she really means it. And in the faint reflection of the metal drawer, the ghost of Lena's steady eyes seemed to stare back. Not vengeful, but absolute. The following week, Charleston's humidity pressed down heavy, and the town's whispers seemed to travel faster than the breeze. Lena sat on her porch with a glass of iced tea, listening to the low hum of cicadas and the soft tap of rain against the wrought iron railing. Her phone buzzed on the table beside her. Once, twice, 3 times. It was Eloise. You need to see this, the message read. A minute later, a screenshot appeared. Brielle posed in front of the Whitmore house gates, hair blown perfectly into place, caption blazing beneath. Building on legacy. Some inherit beauty, others inherit grace and real estate. Whitmore Living has Sonor Next Gen. Lena stared at it for a long moment, not anger, not even surprise. Just the quiet ache of realizing someone still hadn't learned when to be silent. Eloise called before Lena could type a reply. Can you believe that woman? Her friend's voice came sharp, protective. She's acting like you're already 6 feet under. Lena let the silence sit. That's always been her comfort zone, pretending she's already won. You should at least make a public statement, Eloise pressed. No, Lena said simply, her voice firm but even. I prefer actions to noise. Eloise exhaled, half a laugh, half a sigh. That's you all right. God help the one who mistakes your quiet for surrender. After the call, Lena stood, moving through the hallway of the Whitmore home. The late sunlight filtered through lace curtains, casting patterns on the mahogany floorboards. The house smelled faintly of lemon oil and camellia blooms. Every framed photograph, every polished heirloom carried a lifetime of stories, and it struck her how none of those stories had Brielle in them. Not really. That night, she began sorting through her belongings. A pearl brooch to Marjorie Lane, the librarian who'd helped her finish her master's degree back in '84. An antique silver tea set to the church she once taught Sunday school at. A set of gardening tools, worn smooth by years of use, for her community garden's caretaker. Each item she wrapped carefully in linen, attaching handwritten tags that read, "From Lena, with intention." When she was done, she opened her laptop, setting up the small camera her grandson had once gifted her for Christmas. The red light blinked alive. "Hello," she began, voice calm, eyes steady. If you're watching this, it means I remembered you. And I wanted to tell you what mattered wasn't the house, or the garden, or the name. It was the way you showed up, and never asked for anything in return. She paused, then smiled faintly. That's what makes something worth inheriting. Over the next 3 evenings she recorded messages, short, precise, full of warmth that came from truth, not performance. The videos were labeled, encrypted, and placed in a folder for Claire to release when the time came. By the weekend she felt lighter. Her world, once so weighed down by what others expected, had narrowed into something elegant, just the essentials. That peace lasted until Graham's name flashed on her phone. "Mom," he began, voice hesitant. "Brielle told me what happened at the office. She thinks you're trying to punish her." Lena didn't respond immediately. The rain outside ticked softly against the window pane. "Do you think that?" "I think..." His voice cracked. "I think she was wrong that day, and I should have stopped it. I'm sorry, Mom." Lena closed her eyes, the apology landing softly but without weight. "I accept that, Graham. But don't mistake forgiveness for forgetting. We move forward differently now." There was silence on the line, the sound of a son realizing a door had closed without slamming. When they hung up, Lena turned to the small stack of folders Claire had sent for final verification. One by one she reviewed them, signatures crisp, clauses airtight, Brielle's name nowhere to be found. The last page bore Claire's note in neat print. "Filed with Charleston County. Confirmed and recorded." Lena exhaled. For the first time in years, she felt like her life, her legacy, belonged entirely to her again. She stood by the window, the city lights flickering in the distance, and allowed herself one brief, fragile smile. Then her phone buzzed again. Another message from Eloise. "You might want to sit down before you check Brielle's latest post." Lena's pulse slowed, not from fear but anticipation. She opened the app, and there it was. A video of Brielle giving a home tour of her future estate, gesturing at rooms that weren't hers, speaking into a camera like she already owned the past. Lena watched, unmoving, until the video ended. Then she whispered to herself, her tone soft as velvet but colder than marble, "Let her keep filming. One day she'll have to watch it back and see the truth." She closed the app, turned off the lamp, and let the room fall into darkness, quiet, deliberate, absolute. By mid-June, Charleston's evenings had turned heavy and gold, the kind of heat that pressed its palm against every window pane. Lena stood at the head of her dining table, adjusting a set of ivory taper candles until the flames burned steady. The table gleamed, crystal, silver, hydrangeas cut fresh from her garden. It was her first dinner since Mother's Day. The guest list was short by design. Eloise arrived first, breezing in with a chilled bottle of Chardonnay and a knowing grin. "No place cards tonight?" she teased, handing off her wrap. "No need," Lena said, arranging the glasses. "Everyone here already knows where they stand." The doorbell rang twice more. Thomas Ray and his wife entered next, followed by the Lanes, her neighbors from 2 houses down. Familiar faces, safe ones, the air filled with warm chatter, the kind that carried history in every laugh. They dined on roast chicken and lemon risotto. Conversation drifted between travel plans, garden tours, and old school board gossip. Yet an unspoken awareness hung between them all, a quiet curiosity. Brielle's chair was empty. It was Thomas who broke the silence first. "Is Graham joining us tonight?" Lena set her fork down gently. "He was invited," she said. "He declined." Eloise sipped her wine and smiled faintly. "Then the air will stay pleasant." The table rippled with soft laughter, sympathetic, not cruel. Even in humor, they respected Lena's restraint. Later, as dessert was served, Graham finally appeared. He hovered at the doorway, shirt wrinkled, expression careful. "Mom," he began, almost too quietly. "I didn't realize everyone was still here." Lena gestured to the open seat beside her. "You're welcome to join, Graham." He hesitated, then sat. The conversation resumed, lighter now but threaded with tension. The single question no one asked lingered like humidity in the room. "Where's Brielle?" Finally, Mrs. Lane, sweet and blunt as ever, asked it. "And how's your lovely wife, Graham? Haven't seen her around." Graham's shoulders tightened. "She's been busy. Interior projects? Clients?" Lena didn't correct him. She didn't have to. The faintest flicker of acknowledgement passed through the table, one of those silent exchanges between people who knew truth when they saw it. When the evening wound down, Lena walked her guests out beneath the soft buzz of the porch light. Eloise lingered last, looping her arm through Lena's. "You did the right thing," she murmured. "Sometimes absence is the only boundary that speaks clearly." Lena nodded, watching fireflies blink in the yard. Let her absence do the talking then. Inside, the house felt peaceful again, hers alone. Across town, however, peace was not on Brielle's mind. Her phone camera glowed against her face as she spoke, voice dripping with performative calm. "Sometimes, when you outgrow toxic elders, they paint you as the villain. But healing means choosing distance, even from family." Healing journey, our self-worth croissage, toxic boundaries. She hit post and smiled, sharp, satisfied. Minutes later, that same post landed in Thomas Ray's inbox. He sat in his quiet home office, shaking his head as he took screenshots and attached timestamps. "Reputation management indeed," he muttered. He forwarded them to Claire and Lena with one line, "Flagged for documentation. No response needed." Lena read the message that night without emotion. She simply filed it into her private archive and returned to the papers on her desk. Among them sat a packet from Hart & Associates Funeral and Trust Planning. She opened it, scanning through the pages until she reached Final Arrangements. The pen in her hand felt heavier than usual, but her signature came easy. Private cremation. Executor: Eloise Vance. No family attendance required. No interment at family plot. Each choice was a statement, measured, unflinching. She didn't just plan her estate anymore. She was curating her absence. When it was done, she sealed the envelope, slid it into her desk drawer, and turned off the lamp. From outside, thunder rolled low across the harbor, slow and distant. Lena crossed to the window, watching the storm build over the water. Lightning flashed, illuminating her reflection in the glass, poised, solitary, resolved. A faint smirk touched her lips. "Let her have her hashtags," she murmured. "I'll keep the history." The thunder answered, closer this time, the sky flickering white. And as the first drops of rain tapped the window, Lena whispered to no one. "She's isolating herself faster than I ever could." Behind her, the single candle left burning on the dining table guttered and went out. The rain that had rolled in over Charleston stayed for 2 more days, washing the city clean of pollen and gossip in equal measure. On the 3rd morning, the air broke clear again, bright, washed blue, and deceptively calm. Eloise arrived at Lena's porch with 2 coffees and a look that said she'd been dying to talk. "You've gone quiet," she said, settling into the rocking chair beside her. "That always means something's brewing." Lena smiled faintly, her eyes tracing the wet sheen on the garden path. "You could say that." Eloise took a sip. "Well, whatever it is, I'm in. You planning another charitable surprise? Or a small-scale social coup?" "Neither," Lena said, standing. She went inside for a moment and returned with a small black device, its surface gleaming. She set it gently on the table between them. A digital recorder, the kind used by teachers for lectures. Eloise's brow arched. What's that? The reason I slept soundly the night Brielle told me to rot and die. Eloise blinked, leaning in. You recorded her? I record everything, Lena said simply. Habit from my years in administration, meetings, parent calls, disciplinary hearings. I never hit record to trap people, just to remember them accurately. Turns out memory is more valuable than gold. She pressed play. The device crackled to life, and for a moment the sound of silverware and faint jazz filled the air. Then Brielle's voice cut through. Sharp, venomous, undeniable. You want gratitude? Here it is. Thank you for everything. Now rot and die already. The echo of that sentence hung between them, cruel even in replay. Eloise's face shifted. Shock first, then satisfaction. You're a genius, she breathed. That's more than words. That's evidence. Lena's gaze stayed steady. I don't want revenge, Eloise. I want record. Truth has a way of aging well. By afternoon, she was seated once again in Claire Hart's office, the recorder resting on the mahogany desk. Claire listened with her usual composure, though her eyes flickered at the key phrase. Mrs. Whitmore, she said carefully, what you have here is a documented instance of verbal abuse directed at a benefactor in public. Under state inheritance law, that can serve as grounds for disqualification if properly worded. Then word it, Lena said. Claire nodded slowly, already drafting. We'll add a new clause, moral and behavioral disqualification due to documented abuse. It will stand as part of the final will. Lena folded her hands. Make sure the wording is clean. I don't want vindictiveness on record, just cause and consequence. When Thomas arrived an hour later, she handed him the flash drive copy. You'll want this backed up. He listened briefly, then looked up. I'll move your liquid assets into the charitable trust today. That way, even if she tries to contest, there's nothing left for her to touch. That's why you've always been my favorite accountant, Lena said. Financial advisor? He corrected gently. Titles are for the living, she replied, a hint of humor ghosting through her tone. Outside, the sun angled low, painting long stripes of light across Claire's office wall as the paperwork began. The three of them worked in near silence, signatures, seals, and notarizations forming the quiet choreography of finality. Meanwhile, miles away, Brielle was posting again. Her latest update was a photograph of herself in the Whitmore parlor, arms folded, smile perfected. The caption read, Some people cling to power until it's pried from cold fingers. I'm patient. I can wait for what's deserved. The post racked up comments within minutes, sympathy from her followers, flattery from acquaintances who smelled opportunity. Claire's phone buzzed as the notification came through. She glanced at Lena. You'll want to see this. Lena read it once, then again, and she laughed. A low, elegant sound that startled both of them. She thinks patience is a virtue, Lena said, gathering her purse. But in her case, it's just unpaid time. As she turned to leave, Thomas caught her with one last question. So what now? Everything's in place, every clause signed. You've built a wall she can't climb. Lena paused in the doorway, her silhouette outlined in the evening light. Now, she said, we let the silence do its work. Claire sealed the envelope containing the updated will, pressing her notary stamp into the wax. The mark gleamed crimson, warm under the lamplight. Lena watched it harden. That, she murmured, is the sound of a door closing. Eloise met her at the curb afterward, waiting with that same conspiratorial spark. Well? She asked. It's done, Lena said, sliding into the passenger seat. Eloise grinned. You don't look relieved. I'm not, Lena said, looking out at the sunset bleeding over the harbor. Relief comes after justice. What I feel now is precision. They drove in silence, the recorder resting between them like a quiet secret. Back at home, Lena placed the device in her desk drawer, beside the sealed funeral plans. She locked it, pocketed the key, and drew the curtains shut. In the distance, church bells marked 6 o'clock. Slow, deliberate chimes echoing through the humid air. She whispered to herself as the last note faded. She'll get exactly what she earned. Then, softer still, as if to seal her promise, nothing. And the room went still, the faintest hum of the recorder's final light blinking once before going dark. The morning light in Charleston was sharp enough to sting, sunlight bouncing off the white columns of the Whitmore house, as if even the weather refused to soften its edges that day. Lena's gardener, James, called just before 10. "Mrs. Whitmore, ma'am, you might want to get down here. There's company." Company. That word carried the kind of politeness Charlestoners used when describing a train wreck. When Lena's car turned the corner onto her own street, she saw it, 5 gleaming SUVs lined along her front gate, a small crowd of women in sundresses and wedges laughing as they followed Brielle up the marble steps of her home. Brielle was in her element, her voice projecting for effect. "This foyer, see that original millwork? We're talking pre-war craftsmanship. The Whitmore estate is practically a case study in generational design." One of the women raised her phone to record. "So you're taking over the remodel?" "Oh, honey," Brielle said, smiling sweetly. "You could say that." Lena parked quietly by the curb, stepped out, and smoothed her linen jacket. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her heels on the marble were enough to turn every head in the room. "Good morning," she said evenly, her tone cutting through the chatter like glass sliding through water. The women froze mid-tour. Brielle turned, surprise flashing before her expression hardened. "Lena, I didn't expect you to." "Be in my own house?" Lena interrupted softly. "How inconsiderate of me." One of the clients tried to smooth over the tension. "Oh, we were just admiring your beautiful home, Mrs. Whitmore. Brielle said you'd given her permission to show it." "I didn't," Lena said. Her smile was flawless. "But I'm sure you didn't know that." The women exchanged uneasy looks. Brielle's hand tightened around her clipboard. "This is a professional meeting, Lena. I'm building my business. Your legacy helps me do that." Lena stepped closer, her voice low enough to make every word land. "My legacy doesn't take appointments, and my home is not your showroom." A beat of silence, then calmly, "Ladies, the tour is over. You're free to leave, through the same door you entered." There was something about her composure that made obedience instinctive. The women murmured quick apologies and gathered their purses, the sound of their heels fading across the tile like rain receding down a gutter. Brielle stood rigid, watching them go. "You just humiliated me in front of potential clients." "No," Lena said, stepping past her. "You did that when you invited them." "God, you're unbelievable," Brielle snapped. "You think you can control everything even now? The house, the name, the trust," Lena said. That stopped her. "What?" Lena turned, her gaze precise. "This property has been placed in a protective trust. Legally, you have no rights here. No access. No future claim. You can sell your style tips elsewhere." Brielle's eyes widened. "You're bluffing." Lena's reply was so quiet it chilled the air. "You're broke." The words landed like a verdict. At that exact moment, the door opened again. Graham stood there, drawn, tired, his voice already caught between the two women. "What's going on here?" Lena didn't look at him. "Your wife was trespassing. Handle your wife, Graham." He swallowed hard. "Mom?" "Not Mom, not right now." He looked at Brielle, whose face had turned pale beneath her practiced poise. "You should go," he muttered. Brielle's voice cracked. "You're siding with her?" "I'm asking you to leave before she makes this worse," he said. But it was already worse. Claire Hart arrived 20 minutes later, papers in hand, her presence like a cold front moving through. "Mrs. Whitmore, I've already drafted notices for restricted access," she said. "We can have them filed today." Brielle tried to laugh, brittle and desperate. "You can't seriously." Claire's tone was dry as chalk. "The estate's new trust terms authorize enforcement. If you re-enter this property without written consent, you'll be trespassing under law." For once, Brielle had no words. She brushed past Lena on her way out, the scent of her perfume sharp, artificial, fleeting. When the door shut behind her, the house fell silent except for the distant ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. Graham stood frozen, guilt written across his face. "She didn't mean—" Lena cut him off gently. "Intentions are excuses people reach for when truth becomes inconvenient." He didn't argue, he just nodded once, the motion small and defeated, and followed Brielle out into the heat. Lena exhaled slowly, her calm returning. Claire placed the documents on the console table for her signature. "Do you want to file the notices immediately?" "Yes," Lena said. "File them before sunset. I'd like the house to sleep undisturbed tonight." Claire gave a short nod and gathered her things. "Understood." When she was gone, Lena moved through the empty house, her house, touching the banister, the cool marble, the framed photos that told the story of a family Brielle had never truly belonged to. She stopped by the window, watching the two of them arguing near the driveway. Graham's gestures were pleading. Brielle's were sharp, wild, cutting the air. Then she turned away, her voice a whisper meant only for the quiet walls. She wanted control. A pause. She just learned what it feels like to lose it. And as dusk slid over Charleston, Lena signed the final page of the trespass notice. Her name steady, elegant, the ink drying like a boundary finally made visible. The summer deepened, bringing that late August stillness where even the air seemed to wait for something to end. The Whitmore house sat under its canopy of live oaks, windows gleaming like eyes that had seen too much and were done pretending surprise. Lena sat at her writing desk in the parlor, her pen moving with unhurried certainty across a stack of legal forms. The papers were spread out beside her morning tea, and a single vase of white lilies, her favorite, though she'd never told anyone why. She had already redone her estate. Now she was rewriting her exit. The document heading read, "Final Directives and Posthumous Requests." The first clause was simple, deliberate, private cremation. No family attendance permitted. Lena signed beneath it, the tip of her pen pressing deep enough to leave an impression on the page beneath. When she finished, she placed the pages in a manila envelope and wrote, in neat script, "To be executed without deviation." That same afternoon, she called Eloise. Her friend arrived within the hour, her usual perfume trailing in before her. "You sounded official," she said lightly. "I need an executor," Lena replied. "Someone who won't flinch when sentiment tries to rewrite my wishes." Eloise blinked. "You're serious?" "I'm done with half measures," Lena said, sliding the envelope across the desk. "This is what I want. No church, no family spectacle, no Whitmore theatrics. Ashes, not ceremony." Eloise hesitated, her fingers hovering over the envelope. "They're going to hate this." "They already do," Lena said. Then quieter. "Let them." For a moment the two women just sat in the filtered light, the cicadas droning through the open window. Finally, Eloise nodded and took the envelope. "Then I'll make sure it's done right." Across town, Brielle was already posting again. Her feed had turned into a gallery of smug captions and pastel filters, brunches, spa days, unbothered smiles that reeked of defiance. That morning, she posted a photo of herself with a mimosa raised high and the words, "Can't wait for the reading. Finally." Next, Chapter Crow, Truce, Whitmore Legacy. The comments were full of heart emojis and hollow congratulations. Brielle read every one of them like they were gospel. When Thomas saw the post, he simply forwarded it to Claire with a single note: "Prepare accordingly." By that evening, Claire sat in her office with the will open before her, her meticulous handwriting marking new instructions. Given Mrs. Whitmore's preferences, she dictated to her assistant, "A final letter will be read aloud posthumously to all attending beneficiaries. It will be the only direct statement in her own words." The assistant looked up. "And to Mrs. Whitmore's daughter-in-law?" Claire's lips pressed thin. "One paragraph, as specified." Meanwhile, in the Whitmore home, Lena sat at her desk again, the same spot where she had signed away Brielle's access, her expression calm, almost tender. A blank sheet of paper waited before her. She smoothed its surface, dipped her pen, and began to write. To Brielle: "You mistook proximity for power, inheritance for worth, and noise for influence. I leave you no wealth, no title, no place at any table built by my labor. What I leave you is a lesson that nothing of value is owed to those who measure love by ownership. Consider it my final act of generosity, clarity." She let the ink dry before folding it neatly, tucking it into the folder labeled "Final Letter." The next morning, Graham came by unannounced. He looked thinner, drawn, the kind of man who'd been arguing more than sleeping. "Mom," he said quietly, standing in the doorway of her study. She didn't look up. "Does she know you're here?" He shook his head. "No. She doesn't know where I go anymore." Lena finally met his eyes. There was no triumph in hers, only a soft kind of resignation. "Good," she said. "Then maybe you'll find your own way back." He stepped closer, voice breaking. "I'm sorry for all of it. I should have stopped her sooner." "Apologies are only valuable when they change behavior," Lena replied gently. "So don't tell me. Show me." He nodded, swallowing hard. "I will." After he left, Lena stood by the window, watching him walk down the drive, slower than before, but straighter somehow. The live oaks rustled overhead, their shadows stretching across the lawn like blessings withheld and finally deserved. That night, she sent one last email to Claire, all directives confirmed. "Proceed as discussed. No revisions will be made." She hit send, closed her laptop, and blew out the candle beside her. The room fell into silence, the scent of lilies thick in the air. Upstairs, the grandfather clock chimed once, a deep, patient tone that lingered long after it should have faded. Lena whispered into the quiet, not with anger, but with conviction sharpened to grace. She'll still get something. A pause. Her own moment of clarity. And with that, she turned off the light, the house settling into its calm, as though even the walls understood a reckoning had been signed, sealed, and waiting to be read. The night Lena chose for her farewell dinner was one of those Charleston evenings that looked painted. The sky streaked coral, the air thick with honeysuckle and salt. She had ordered the garden strung with lanterns, their soft light washing over the hydrangeas and brick walkways. Every detail was deliberate: the linen, the crystal, the table set for 8. Not family, not obligation. Just the people who had earned their seat. Eloise arrived first in a silk shawl the color of bourbon. "You're glowing," she said, handing Lena a small box of lemon tarts. "Either this is peace or plotting, and I'm not sure which." Lena smiled. "Both, maybe." Thomas and his wife followed, along with the Lanes from next door and Marjorie Lane, the retired librarian who'd once helped Lena through her master's thesis. The air buzzed with warmth, the kind that felt safe, unforced. As the dinner began, the sounds of laughter and clinking glasses filled the night. The garden seemed to hum with life, though somewhere in that laughter, an undercurrent lingered. The sense that something final was happening, even if no one dared to name it. Midway through the meal, Lena stood. Her pale blue dress shimmered under the lanterns, and her voice carried the same calm authority that had once ruled classrooms and board meetings alike. "Everyone here tonight," she began, "has shaped some part of my life I wanted to leave with gratitude, not formality." She motioned to the sideboard, where small velvet boxes and wrapped parcels waited. "Before the courses are done, I want to return pieces of my history to the people who helped make it worth keeping." Eloise rose halfway from her chair. "Lena, you're not supposed to—" "I am," Lena interrupted, smiling gently. "And I've already signed away the paperwork, so there's no stopping me." One by one, she handed them out. A sapphire brooch to Eloise. "For loyalty that never had conditions." A sterling letter opener to Thomas. "For every closed door you helped unlock." A rare first edition novel to Marjorie. "For reminding me that words can outlive reputation." Each gesture was quiet, personal. But everyone noticed what was missing: the set of antique crystal decanters, the ones Brielle had coveted since the first time she'd walked through the house. When Thomas's wife asked softly, "And those?" Lena smiled. "They're staying. Some things are meant to wait for silence before being appreciated." The group laughed politely, though Eloise gave her a knowing look. After dessert, Eloise raised her glass. "To legacies made while alive," she said, voice warm but steady. "Because waiting until you're gone gives the wrong people too much say." The table murmured approval, glasses clinking beneath the garden lights. Lena met her friend's eyes and nodded. "She'll still get something," Lena said, almost idly, her own moment of clarity. The words drifted over the table like perfume. Sweet, haunting, final. Later, as the plates were cleared and the laughter softened into nostalgia, the gate creaked open. Graham stepped through, shoulders tense, eyes shadowed. He paused at the edge of the lantern glow, uncertain. "Graham," Lena said, her voice neither warm nor cold, "just open enough." He nodded in greeting to the others, then walked quietly to the seat beside her. There was a kind of reverent hush as he sat, the scrape of his chair echoing faintly against the brick. For a long while, he said nothing. He simply watched his mother pour him a glass of water, the smallest kindness breaking the tension between them. When he finally spoke, it was barely more than a whisper. "She doesn't understand what she's done." "I know," Lena replied. "I think she will soon," he said. "I know that too." They didn't need to say more. When the guests began to leave, Lena walked them each to the gate, hugging them one by one. The air had cooled, and the scent of gardenia clung to her hair. Eloise lingered last again, as always. "It felt like a goodbye tonight," she said quietly. Lena looked toward the flickering lanterns. "It was, but not mine." As the gate closed behind her, Lena turned to find Graham still sitting at the table, the last candle burning low. She walked over and placed her hand on his shoulder. He stood, hesitating just a second before pulling her into a hug. Hesitant at first, then solid, as though he was anchoring himself. Lena closed her eyes and held him, one hand at the back of his neck, the way she had when he was a boy. No words, no forgiveness spoken aloud. Just the kind of quiet that meant both. When he finally stepped back, the last candle sputtered and went out, smoke curling into the air. "Good night, Mom," he said softly. "Good night, Graham." He left down the brick path, his footsteps fading into the dark. Lena stayed behind, alone in the glow of the lanterns. She gathered the remaining gifts, stacked them neatly on the sideboard, and glanced toward the empty chair across from her. The night was still. Even the crickets seemed to pause. Lena smiled faintly to herself and whispered, "Dinner's over." Then she blew out the lantern nearest her, leaving the garden in a darkness that felt earned. The morning of the will reading dawned bright and windless, Charleston's kind of deceptive peace. The Whitmore house stood open, polished, and silent, its parlor arranged with perfect symmetry. Portraits stared down from the walls as though waiting for judgment. Claire Hart stood at the center of it all, every inch the executor, composed, clinical, and unyielding. The sealed envelope sat on the table before her, red wax glinting against the dark oak. Eloise was first to arrive, wearing a black dress with no apology in its simplicity. She moved quietly, her presence steady as stone. Thomas followed, nodding at her, his usual ease replaced with somber efficiency. Then came Graham, shoulders squared, grief hidden behind duty. He looked around the room as though every object might speak. And finally, Brielle entered. Late, of course. Her heels clicked against the marble like punctuation. She wore cream instead of black, her hair sculpted, her expression a careful blend of sadness and self-assurance. "Beautiful turnout," she murmured, sliding into a seat beside Graham. Mother always did love an audience. Eloise's eyes flicked up from her glass, sharp enough to cut. "Some audiences are invited," she said. Claire cleared her throat, her calm slicing through the tension. "Thank you all for coming. As per Mrs. Whitmore's wishes, this reading will be conducted here, in the family parlor. The document before me is her final, notarized testament." The room settled into stillness. Even the air seemed to tighten. Claire broke the seal. The sound was small but definitive. The tearing of wax and thread, the final unbinding of a lifetime's control. She began to read. "I, Lena Margaret Whitmore, being of sound mind and deliberate intention, declare this my final will and testament." Her voice carried through the parlor like a sermon in marble. "To Graham. To my son, Graham Whitmore, I leave the Whitmore estate and all holdings contained therein, under the following stipulation, that the property be maintained, not sold, and that it serve as a place of education and preservation for the community that once built it. Should this stipulation be violated, full ownership transfers to the Whitmore Charitable Trust." Graham blinked hard, a quiet tremor passing through him. His hands, clasped tight on his knees, loosened. Claire continued, unflinching. To Eloise. To Eloise Vance. I leave the Whitmore Community Garden and its charitable endowment, to be managed at her discretion, as she has done in friendship and in principle. Her stewardship was never bought, only earned. Eloise bowed her head once, swallowing hard. She remembered every word we never said, she murmured. Brielle shifted forward, smoothing her dress. Finally, she whispered under her breath, a smile barely held in check. Claire paused, just long enough to make the silence ache. Then she read the final passage. And to Brielle Whitmore. Every head turned. Even the grandfather clock seemed to hold its breath between ticks. Claire looked down at the page again, her tone steady, her eyes glacial. Your words were loud. This is your silence. The pause that followed was absolute. A vacuum in the center of the room. Brielle blinked, then let out a sharp laugh. You're joking. Claire folded the page, sealing the will with its gravity. I am not. Brielle's voice rose. There must be more. Some appendix. Some clause. This is absurd. She wouldn't. She did, Eloise said quietly. And she meant it. Thomas handed Claire a document folder. Everything's filed with the county. It's legally binding. Graham said nothing. His face was pale, his eyes fixed on the carpet. Brielle turned to him, her disbelief curdling into fury. Say something. Tell them she wouldn't cut me out. He finally looked up, and his voice was hollow. She warned us both. She hated me. No, he said. She saw you. Brielle's breath hitched. You think this is fair? Eloise's tone was cool, almost kind. Fair isn't what she built her life around, dear. It's what she corrected. The clock struck noon, its chime echoing through the parlor, long and low. Brielle's chair scraped against the floor as she stood. This isn't over. Claire didn't look up. It already is. Brielle stared at the will, then at the faces around her. None sympathetic, none surprised. Her lips trembled as she turned toward the doorway, each step sharp, defiant. The door slammed behind her, shaking the old frames on the wall. Silence returned, deep, settling, final. Claire exhaled, setting the will down on the table. Mrs. Whitmore's wishes are now in effect. Thank you all for attending. The guests began to stand, chairs scraping quietly across the hardwood. Graham lingered. She really left nothing? He asked, voice barely above a whisper. Nothing tangible, Claire said, but everything intentional? He nodded once, eyes glistening. That sounds like her. Eloise placed a hand on his arm. Come by the garden next week, she said softly. It's already blooming. As the room emptied, Claire gathered her papers, sealing them back into their envelope. When she turned to leave, she caught sight of Lena's portrait above the mantel. Calm, dignified, a faint half-smile ghosting her lips. For the briefest second, Claire swore the eyes looked almost amused. And outside, on the cobblestone street below, Brielle's heels clattered away into the Charleston heat, the sound of someone who had finally realized what silence costs. Brielle hit the hot Charleston air like a storm breaking loose. Her heels clacked across the cobblestones, too fast for grace, too loud for dignity. She didn't notice the humidity, or the glances from passers-by who paused to stare at the woman with the perfect hair and wild eyes, clutching her purse like it was a lifeline. By the time she reached her car, her face was streaked. Not from tears, but from rage. She sat behind the wheel, hands gripping the steering column until her knuckles went white. Her reflection stared back from the rearview mirror, unflinching, alien. She's gone, she whispered to herself. She can't keep doing this. The house, the money, the name, all gone to other people. To Eloise. Of all people, and Graham, that spineless man, sitting there like a statue while his mother dismantled everything Brielle had built her identity around. Her phone buzzed on the seat beside her. Notifications. Too many of them. People already posting about the will reading. Rumors moved faster than grief. She opened her Instagram app. The blank story bar blinked at her, a small, taunting circle. Without thinking, she hit record. Her face appeared, composed now, practiced. Some people rewrite the truth when they have power and no conscience, she said, her voice smooth, almost calm. But truth always surfaces. Paperwork can be forged. So can witnesses. So stay tuned. She hit post. 30 seconds later, she posted again. A black screen, white text. Inheritance doesn't erase corruption. Some signatures come from trembling hands. Stay tuned. Harj, truth will out. By the time she got home, the comments had begun. Sympathy from friends who liked drama. Speculation from strangers who wanted a scandal. At her townhouse, she poured a glass of white wine and stared out over the city, the sunset slicing the horizon into shards of gold and blood. You thought you could silence me, she muttered, but I know how to speak louder. What she didn't know, couldn't, was that the first copy of her post had already landed in Thomas Ray's inbox. By dawn, Claire Hart's phone rang. She answered before the second ring. Already seen it, she said dryly. We'll issue a response. At 8 o'clock sharp, the law firm's statement hit every local outlet. The Whitmore will was executed, witnessed, and notarized under full legal compliance. Any claims of alteration or misconduct are categorically false. Supporting documentation is filed with Charleston County and the state registry. The tone was surgical. No emotion, no indulgence, just authority. Brielle read it from her bed, the light from her phone casting harsh shadows across her face. "Oh, you smug little," she hissed, tossing the device aside. She snatched it back moments later and began typing. "If they think a notarized stamp means truth, maybe I should remind them who handled Lena's finances for decades. Ever heard of creative accounting?" Thomas read that post mid-meeting. He didn't flinch. He simply forwarded it to his firm's legal department with one line attached: "Prepare, cease, and desist." Then he sent Brielle a private message. Short, cold, final. "Careful. Let's talk about fraud then." Brielle stared at the message, her heart thudding. She deleted her post, but the screenshots were already circulating. By noon, whispers had spread from Charleston cafes to the courthouse steps. "Did you hear what she said on Mother's Day?" someone murmured over coffee at the Battery Cafe. "Told Lena to rot and die right there at brunch. Recorded, they say." "Good Lord," another replied. "And she thought she'd inherit anything?" By evening, the city had decided. Brielle wasn't the victim of a cruel will. She was the woman who'd brought it on herself. At home, she scrolled through the new flood of comments. They'd turned, cruel now, pitying in that way that hurt worse. "You should have respected her. Maybe then you'd have something left." Her phone buzzed again. Graham calling. She hesitated, then answered. "Brielle?" His voice came, quiet, distant. "Stop posting." "She's not here to defend herself," she snapped. "Someone has to—" "She already did. You just weren't listening." And then the line went dead. Brielle threw the phone onto the couch, the sound of glass clattering against hardwood echoing in the quiet. She stood in the middle of the living room, surrounded by furniture she hadn't bought, art she'd chosen to impress others, and silence thick enough to choke on. For the first time, she realized how loud the quiet could be when no one was left to fill it. Outside, the cicadas sang in the heavy twilight. Steady, relentless. Inside, Brielle sank onto the couch, her glass tipping over, white wine pooling across the rug. She muttered to herself, voice small, trembling. "She can't win. She's gone." But the silence that answered felt like Lena's smile. Patient, certain, immortal. And somewhere across town, under the soft light of the community garden she'd built, Lena's name gleamed on the bronze dedication plaque, untouchable, unchallenged, unforgotten. By the following week, Charleston had grown humid and merciless again. The headlines had cooled, but the whispers hadn't. In a city built on reputation, silence could kill faster than scandal. And Brielle was learning that one blocked call at a time. She sat at her kitchen counter, phone in hand, scrolling through contacts she once called partners. There were interior design clients, charity organizers, a local magazine editor who used to beg for her quotes. "Hey, darling, just checking in," she said into the speaker for the third time that morning, her voice sweet and brittle. "Let's do lunch soon. I have a few new projects I think you'll love." The pause on the other end stretched thin. "I'm actually booked up this month," the woman replied, words careful as glass. "And with all the, family noise in the press, we're trying to stay neutral. You understand?" Click. The next number went straight to voicemail. The one after that, a polite text. "So sorry, Brielle. Best to let things settle before we meet publicly." By noon, she had called 11 people. Not one had picked up a second time. She tossed her phone onto the counter, the sound sharp against the marble. "Cowards," she muttered. "Every last one." Her inbox chimed, an email from the boutique's business accountant. She opened it, scanning the lines until one sentence froze her. "Transfer request received from Graham Whitmore. Ownership buyout of Whitmore Atelier, 50%. Effective immediately." The attached document carried his digital signature. He'd sold his half of the boutique, the one she'd convinced him to invest in 3 years ago when business was good and marriage still looked like partnership. She sank into the bar stool, wine glass shaking slightly in her hand. He hadn't even called. Across town that same evening, Eloise stood at a mahogany podium in the Charleston Civic Hall. The fundraiser was packed, the air humming with polite chatter and the scent of gardenia arrangements donated by the Community Garden Committee. When Eloise took the mic, the room stilled. Lena Whitmore, she began, wasn't just a benefactor. She was a boundary. She believed kindness without accountability isn't kindness. It's permission. Her gaze swept across the audience, steady and unflinching. And she never let disrespect go unchecked, not even when silence might have been easier. The applause came soft at first, then steady, rising like a tide of quiet approval. From the back of the room, Thomas leaned over to Claire. "You think she's talking about Brielle?" he whispered. Claire's lips curved faintly. "I think she's talking about everyone who ever underestimated Lena Whitmore." The next morning, Charleston woke to bright skies and a headline across the Post and Courier. "Community Garden, renamed for Lena Whitmore. Dignity grows here." The dedication drew a crowd, city officials, friends, former students, and locals who'd benefited from her programs. Eloise stood at the front with a small bouquet of white lilies, reading a passage from Lena's journals. "Grace is not quiet, it's restraint that speaks." The crowd bowed their heads, cameras clicked. Somewhere, wind moved through the vines, carrying the faint smell of soil and jasmine. From the sidewalk across the street, Brielle watched, sunglasses shielding her face. She'd dressed for an appearance, neutral dress, delicate jewelry, the kind of look designed to seem composed. When the crowd shifted toward the garden entrance, she crossed the street, heels clicking with forced confidence. A volunteer stopped her at the gate. "Sorry, ma'am, this area's for guests listed with the foundation." "I am family," she said through gritted teeth, "Mrs. Whitmore's daughter-in-law." Before the volunteer could answer, Eloise turned from the podium, her expression cooling in an instant. "That's enough," she said, stepping forward. "You don't belong here, Brielle." Brielle forced a smile. "I just came to pay my respects." "You disrespected her every day she breathed," Eloise said quietly. "And now you'll respect her boundary." She nodded toward the event staff. "Please escort her out." The two security volunteers approached, not unkindly, but firmly. Brielle's cheeks burned as the cameras turned her way. "You can't—" "Actually," Eloise said, calm as ever. "We can. And we will." The murmurs rippled through the crowd as Brielle was guided back toward the sidewalk. The reporters didn't follow her. They had their story already. She stopped at the curb, watching as the ribbon was cut, applause rising for a woman she'd spent years trying to outshine. Lena's name shimmered on the bronze plaque under the morning light, the Whitmore Garden, for dignity, growth, and grace. Brielle stood there long after the crowd began to disperse. Her reflection glinted faintly in the metal letters, distorted, uninvited. Behind her, Eloise handed off her bouquet to a child helping at the garden and looked once more toward the gate. For a moment, their eyes met through the sunlight and shadow. Eloise didn't speak, didn't wave. She simply turned away, her silhouette framed by the lilies swaying in the wind. Brielle exhaled shakily and stepped back into the street, cars passing like punctuation around her. She whispered, almost to herself, "She's still winning." But the words sounded hollow, like an echo swallowed by the city that had already chosen sides. And as she walked away, the sound of applause carried faintly from the garden behind her. Proof that Lena Whitmore, even in death, could still fill a room without ever raising her voice. Autumn crept gently into Charleston that year. Cooler breezes, rust-colored leaves pooling in the gutters, and sunlight that slanted soft through the city's narrow streets. The Whitmore name, once whispered with tension, had begun to mean something else entirely: renewal. At the College of Charleston, a banner fluttered across the entrance of the old lecture hall: the Lena Whitmore Scholarship for Second Beginnings. Inside, the first group of recipients sat in neat rows, women in their 30s, 40s, even 60s, clutching folders embossed with Lena's initials. Their eyes carried that mix of hope and disbelief reserved for people who'd been told too often that their chance had passed. At the front, Claire Hart stood beside a podium, her gray suit immaculate, her tone warm but firm. "Mrs. Whitmore wanted to remind us," she said, "that life doesn't end when the world stops applauding you. It begins when you choose to keep going anyway." A ripple of quiet agreement moved through the room. One woman dabbed her eyes. Another raised her hand to ask if she could volunteer at the community garden named in Lena's honor. Claire smiled, thinking Lena would have approved of that question most of all. After the ceremony, she walked back to her car beneath the oaks, her briefcase heavy with signatures and gratitude letters. In the passenger seat, a small leather envelope sat waiting, the one Thomas had delivered that morning. Inside were the final closing documents for the Whitmore estate. When she reached her office, she opened them and read slowly. Every clause was clean, every account balanced, every trust secured. Across the last page, in Thomas's handwriting, was a single line: "Estate closed, uncontested." She ran her finger over the ink and exhaled. "You did it, Lena," she whispered. "You really did." Meanwhile, in a downtown cafe just a few blocks away, Brielle sat with her attorney, a man too polished, too eager. He spoke quickly, pointing to a stack of printed documents. "We can file for an appeal, claim undue influence, maybe argue emotional manipulation." "No," she interrupted. "Just file it. Do it fast." He nodded, already drafting the motion. But by the next morning, the message came back from the Charleston County Probate Office. "Appeal denied. Lack of grounds. Final decision upheld." Case closed within 24 hours. The words might as well have been engraved on stone. Brielle read the email twice, then deleted it, then checked again, as if the outcome might change out of pity. It didn't. The system that had once seemed built to protect her had turned impenetrable. That night, she stared out the window of her apartment, watching the city lights blink across the harbor. Somewhere out there, people were already invoking Lena's name with affection. She could hear the faint echo of her laughter in memory, not warmth, but truth. It filled the room like perfume that refused to fade. Across town, Eloise sat in Lena's old study, the scent of aged paper and cedar heavy in the air. She had been putting it off for weeks, the moment Claire had said, "She left something for you." Now, the small brass key rested in her palm. It fit perfectly into the drawer of Lena's desk. Inside lay 3 leather-bound journals, worn at the corners, each one labeled in Lena's steady hand: years taught, years lost, years reclaimed. Eloise opened the last one. The first page began not with bitterness but reflection. To be remembered kindly is luck. To be remembered truly is work. I hope I've earned the latter. The tears came slow and quiet. Eloise closed the book and pressed her hand to it, feeling as though Lena had left not a void, but a pulse that kept beating through the paper. Later that evening, Graham stopped by the house. He hadn't been there since the funeral arrangements, not since the silence had settled into every room. The study smelled faintly of dust and lilies. Eloise greeted him with a hug that held both forgiveness and fatigue. "She wanted you to have this," she said, handing him one of the journals. He opened it near the middle where a folded note marked the page. Lena's handwriting filled half a sheet, deliberate and looping. "Graham, You cannot fix what you refuse to confront, but you can grow from it. That's all I ever wanted for you. He read it twice, then pressed the paper to his chest. For the first time in months, his breath came uneven, breaking into quiet, shaking sobs. Eloise turned away, giving him privacy, her gaze falling to the portrait above the fireplace, Lena's calm, knowing eyes watching over them both. Outside, the wind carried the faintest rustle of garden leaves from across town, where the bronze plaque glinted under the moonlight, for dignity, growth, and grace. And as Graham wiped his face and closed the journal, he whispered to the empty room, "You got all three, Mom." Then he set the book gently on the desk, beside the key that had opened her words to the world. In the distance, church bells began to ring. Not mournful this time, but steady, resolute, like a life continuing to echo long after the voice behind it was gone. The following spring arrived like a quiet exhale. Charleston bloomed again, azaleas flaring pink along the wrought iron fences, jasmine threading through the air, the city humming with renewal. It had been exactly 1 year since Lena Whitmore's passing, and the garden that bore her name was ready for its first anniversary celebration. The event drew more people than anyone expected. The community garden, once a modest plot of green tucked behind a historic district church, was now an expanse of wild color and carved pathways. Tables were set with white tablecloths, the edges fluttering in the soft wind. A banner stretched above the entry gate, the Lena Whitmore Legacy Day, Dignity, Growth, Grace. Eloise stood near the podium, her posture regal but relaxed. Claire was there too, efficient as ever, reviewing a schedule that didn't need her oversight. Even Thomas, not usually one for sentiment, lingered by the refreshment table, smiling faintly as volunteers handed out programs. Graham arrived just before noon, dressed simply, a folded note in his pocket he had no intention of reading aloud. He paused at the garden gate, taking in the faces, students, mothers, retirees, people Lena had once taught or quietly helped. They weren't mourning, they were grateful. At precisely noon, Eloise stepped up to the microphone. "Lena Whitmore believed," she said, "that what you leave behind should be something that grows, not something that gathers dust." She would have hated pomp, so I'll keep this short. But before we close, there's one last message, something she left for all of us. She nodded to Claire, who pressed play on a small projector screen set near the garden's edge. A faint crackle filled the air. Then Lena appeared, framed by soft afternoon light in her parlor, the familiar wallpaper behind her. She looked every bit herself, poised, silver hair pinned, eyes steady and knowing. "Hello?" she began. Her voice, even through the speakers, had the calm authority that used to still a room. "If you're hearing this, then it means the work continues, and that's all I ever wanted." The crowd quieted completely. Even the birds seemed to pause. "I spent a lifetime learning that dignity isn't silence," she said. "It's knowing when silence speaks louder than words. To those who loved me, I leave everything. My name, my trust, my gratitude. To those who hurt me," she paused, a trace of a smile tugging at her mouth, "I leave the mirror." The audience shifted, breath catching as though they'd heard something sacred and sharp at once. Lena's expression softened. "If you look into it long enough, you'll find every reason you ever needed to change, or not." Then she leaned slightly forward, her tone low and unwavering. "But I hope you do. Because grace isn't about being right, it's about being finished." The screen faded to black. For a long, unbroken moment, no one spoke. A breeze moved through the garden, rippling the lilies near the memorial stone. Then applause began, hesitant, reverent, and soon unstoppable. It wasn't loud, but it was the kind that filled space and hearts alike. Eloise wiped at her eyes. Thomas clapped once, firmly. Claire looked down at her hands, a small smile ghosting across her face. And Graham, he didn't clap at all. He just watched the blank screen, his jaw set, tears shining in his eyes. It was as if hearing her one last time both healed and hollowed him. Across town, in a darkened apartment with curtains drawn, Brielle watched the same video on her phone. Someone had already uploaded it to social media. Lena's voice spilled through the tinny speaker. That same calm certainty Brielle had once mistaken for weakness. When the line came, "To those who hurt me, I leave the mirror." Brielle froze. The phone slipped slightly in her hand. The reflection on the black screen stared back at her. Her own face, pale, drawn, older somehow. She tried to scoff, to whisper something bitter and clever, but no words came. Outside her window, the city hummed on without her. By nightfall, the video had gone viral, shared, quoted, remixed into reels and posts. One line in particular took on a life of its own. "Dignity doesn't beg." It appeared on posters, tote bags, a local mural near the college. The phrase became shorthand for boundaries, strength, survival. It was Lena's voice distilled into an anthem. Even Claire, usually too pragmatic for sentiment, admitted to Thomas, "It's remarkable." She managed to keep teaching, even after she was gone. The next day, Graham called Brielle for the last time. She answered on the third ring, her voice hoarse. "Graham, if this is about—" "It's about ending things properly," he said. "I'm filing for divorce. The house is off limits. The accounts are separate. I'll send you the paperwork." There was a long silence. "You're really cutting me out," she said finally. He exhaled. "I'm just following my mother's lead." Click. For several minutes, Brielle sat staring at her phone, the word mirror replaying in her mind like a curse. In another part of Charleston, the community garden glowed beneath its lanterns. Volunteers were still sweeping petals from the paths when Graham walked through the gate. He paused before the bronze plaque, his reflection faint against the polished metal. He reached out, tracing the engraved words with his thumb: dignity, growth, grace. Then, quietly, he whispered, "You're free now, Mom." The wind picked up, rustling through the garden vines, scattering a few loose blossoms onto the path. And as the lights dimmed for the night, Lena Whitmore's final lesson lingered in the air. Not vengeance, not sorrow, but the kind of peace that only comes when truth has nothing left to prove. By midsummer, Charleston's heat was back with a vengeance, the kind that curled hairlines, wilted flowers, and tested everyone's patience. Inside her air-conditioned law office, Claire Hart reviewed one last stack of forms, their legal precision as cool and sharp as the marble floors beneath her heels. At the top of the pile sat a single directive, sealed and labeled in Lena's tidy script: branding rights, name revocation, posthumous enforcement. Claire had expected it. Lena always planned 3 steps ahead, even beyond the grave. Still, as she opened the envelope, the crisp efficiency of the language made her pause. Upon contest, dispute, or misrepresentation of association, revoke the usage rights of the Whitmore name from all unrelated parties, present and future. It was surgical. Absolute. Claire signed the enforcement order with one precise stroke. Within an hour, 3 letters went out. One to the county records office, one to the Business Licensing Bureau, and one directly to Brielle's attorney. By morning, the Charleston Business Registry was updated. Whitmore Interior Atelier. Status: name rights revoked. The boutique's signage would have to come down by the end of the week. Across town, Brielle stood outside the storefront that still bore her former surname, the letters catching sunlight in cruel defiance. The painter beside her, contracted by the county, waited with his ladder. "Ma'am," he said gently, "I've been told I need to remove the name by 5. She didn't answer. She just watched as he pried the first W from the brick, its absence leaving a pale outline. One by one, the letters came down, until the facade looked strangely naked, like something pretending to forget what it used to be. Inside, the showroom was silent. Brielle stood among furniture pieces and color swatches that suddenly looked staged, foreign. She sank onto a velvet settee. The kind she used to boast was Whitmore blue, and buried her face in her hands. She stayed that way until her phone chimed. A message from her attorney. Received letter from Lena Whitmore's executor. You should read this yourself. It's marked only if she contests. Attached was a PDF, scanned from thick stationery. The header was unmistakable. L.M. Whitmore. Brielle opened it. The letter was short. The ink faintly slanted, each word deliberate. To the one who contests what was never hers. The Whitmore name was built on integrity, not convenience. It was carried by men who worked and by women who endured. You did neither. You borrowed the shine, but none of the substance. And now, as law restores what love could not, you may finally discover who you are without it. Consider this my final act of clarity. You cannot lose what you never truly carried. There was no signature, just Lena's embossed seal pressed into the bottom corner. Simple, elegant, final. Brielle dropped the phone onto the couch beside her, her chest rising in shallow bursts. She's dead, she whispered. She's dead. She doesn't get to do this. But Lena had done exactly that, reaching from the past with a precision Brielle couldn't match even when she was alive. Later that afternoon, Thomas Ray stopped by the law office, a folder in hand. Final financial audit, he told Claire. Estate accounts, trusts, scholarships. All closed, all reconciled. He opened the folder for her to see the last page. Every line item was accounted for. Every disbursement confirmed. Every beneficiary listed clearly, and nowhere was Brielle Whitmore's name. Thomas tapped the paper once. I triple-checked. Clean as glass. Claire nodded. Lena would have liked that. She'd have called it justice, Thomas said. Meanwhile, Brielle sat in her darkened apartment, curtains drawn against the city she no longer recognized. The boutique's social media pages had been deactivated. The website, too. Even her email signature looked strange without the name at the end. She scrolled through her old posts, each one a portrait of confidence, smiling, posing, claiming. Each caption rang hollow now, like echoes from someone else's life. Her phone buzzed on the counter. She didn't expect Graham to respond, but she texted him anyway. You won. Are you happy? Minutes passed. Then an hour. No reply. Finally, she sent another. You can't erase me like she did. This time, the message marked delivered but never read. Brielle stared at the screen until it dimmed, reflecting her face back at her. The faint ghost of her own outline in the glass, smaller, fainter than she remembered. Across town, the community garden shimmered in twilight. Eloise had just locked up the gate when she noticed an unmarked envelope resting on the memorial bench. She picked it up, the handwriting instantly familiar. Inside was a note from Lena, dated months before her death, for when she tries again. Below it, a single line written in that same unflinching elegance. Silence her with truth, not cruelty. Truth lasts longer. Eloise folded the letter slowly, the faintest smile forming at the edges of her mouth. You really thought of everything, she whispered. She slipped the note into her pocket, the sound of crickets rising around her. The garden lights blinked on one by one, a constellation of calm over the soil Lena once tended herself. Somewhere, in another part of Charleston, a woman sat in a dark room surrounded by everything she'd ever bought to feel important, and not one thing that still had her name on it. And as the city lights flickered beyond her window, Brielle's phone buzzed one last time. A push notification she didn't open. Trending. Dignity doesn't beg. 1 year later. The screen went black again, reflecting her face in perfect, merciless silence. By early autumn, Charleston had quieted again. The air was lighter, the river slower, as though the whole city had taken a deep breath after a year of gossip, grief, and reckoning. What had once been a family tragedy had become, almost imperceptibly, a lesson. On a Wednesday morning, the Charleston Review released its fall issue. The cover was simple, cream background, embossed title. But it was the subtitle that made people stop at the newsstands. Inheritance of Grace, the final letter of Lena Whitmore. Inside, beneath an editor's note, Lena's words stretched across 3 pages, elegant and unflinching. It wasn't a will, not exactly. It was a confession, a reflection, a declaration of boundaries drawn too late, but held forever. I was not born patient. I learned it the hard way. By waiting for people to become who they promised to be. I waited through disappointment, through insult, through the quiet erosion that comes from loving someone who mistakes your forgiveness for weakness. But love without boundaries is not virtue. It's surrender. I gave and gave until giving became habit. Only near the end did I realize that grace is not endless. It is earned, and it is finite. To anyone who reads this, know that loss is not always punishment. Sometimes it is permission to begin again. And to those who tried to break what they did not build, I forgive you, because I no longer need to remember you. The letter ended with one final line, centered and spare. You are not your pain, but what you do with it. That sentence rippled across Charleston. It appeared on church bulletins, social feeds, and the chalkboard of a downtown cafe. It was quoted by college professors and pinned to community boards. For many, it felt like Lena had written it directly to them. At the Whitmore House, now part historical site, part community archive, Claire Hart stood in Lena's old office. The room smelled faintly of cedar polish and lilac. On the wall, framed between Lena's portrait and her teaching certificates, hung a printed copy of Inheritance of Grace, sealed under glass. Claire adjusted the frame slightly until it hung perfectly straight. There, she murmured, exactly where you wanted it. Footsteps approached behind her. Eloise entered, her cane tapping gently against the floorboards. She wore no morning black now, only deep green silk, the color of life returning. People still leave flowers out front, she said, even after all this time. Claire smiled faintly. She wouldn't have wanted flowers. She'd have wanted people to finish what they start. Eloise nodded, then moved closer to the framed letter. Her fingertips brushed against the glass, tracing the final line. You are not your pain, but what you do with it. She repeated the words softly, like a prayer. That's the part everyone's quoting, Claire said. It's the part that hurts the most, Eloise replied. Because it's true. Outside, visitors wandered the gardens, their voices low, reverent. The Whitmore property had become a place of quiet reflection, classrooms, reading nooks, a small exhibit about Lena's life and work. But her office remained untouched. The desk still held her fountain pen. The chair still faced the window, angled toward the garden beyond. Every Saturday morning, Graham came by before the doors opened. He never called ahead, never brought anyone with him. He would sit by the window seat, coffee in hand, and look out over the same view his mother had loved. The magnolia trees bending toward the light, the river glinting beyond them. Sometimes he read from her journals. Sometimes he didn't. He never stayed long. When he left, he always stopped by the community garden on his way home. There, at the base of the bronze plaque, he'd lay one white lily, never roses, and stand for a moment, saying nothing. He didn't need to. Across town, in a half-packed apartment, Brielle folded clothes into suitcases. The air smelled of dust and old perfume. There were no photos on the walls anymore, no framed nameplates or letters marked Whitmore. She'd told her realtor she was relocating for new opportunities. But the truth was simpler. Charleston no longer had a place that would hold her without whispering. When the last box was sealed, she glanced at the mirror leaning against the wall. The edges were chipped from moving, the reflection dull from disuse. For a moment she thought she saw Lena there, the tilt of her chin, that knowing calm. Then she blinked, and it was only herself. Brielle turned the mirror to the wall and left it there. As evening fell, the garden lights flickered to life. Eloise walked its paths alone, the scent of soil and memory thick in the air. She paused by the dedication plaque, running her hand over the engraved words, for dignity, growth, and grace. "Rest easy, old friend," she whispered. "You got the last word." In the twilight, a soft breeze rustled through the leaves, carrying the faint hum of distant laughter, the kind that sounds like freedom earned, not given. And in the city beyond, life continued. Quiet, rebalanced, touched everywhere by the invisible hand of a woman who had written her truth so clearly that even death couldn't end the conversation.